Good morning, guys. So today we're reading chapters 20 and 21 in Farewell to Manzanar. We only have one chapter left after that, so we'll be finishing that up tomorrow. I'll go ahead and start with chapter 20. It's called A Double Impulse. When the 6th grade teacher ushered me in, the other kids inspected me, but not unlike I myself would study a new arrival. She was a warm, benevolent woman who tried to make this first day as easy as possible. She gave me the morning to get the feel of the room. That afternoon, during a reading lesson, she finally asked me if I'd care to try a page out loud. I had not yet opened my mouth except to smile. When I stood up, everyone turned to watch. Any kid entering a new class wants, first of all, to be liked. This was uppermost in my mind. I smiled wider, then began to read. I made no mistakes. When I finished, a pretty blonde girl in front of me said, quite innocently, "Gee, I didn't know you could speak English." She was genuinely amazed. I was stunned. How could this have even been in doubt? It isn't difficult now to explain her reaction, but at age 11, I couldn't believe anyone could think such a thing, say such a thing about me, or regard me in that way. I smiled and sat down, suddenly aware of what being of Japanese ancestry was going to be like. I wouldn't be faced with physical attack or with overt shows of hatred. Rather, I would be seen as someone foreign, or as someone other than American, or perhaps not be seen at all. During the years in camp, I had never really understood why we were there, nor had I questioned it much. I knew no one in my family had committed a crime. If I needed explanations at all, I conjured up vague notions about a war between America and Japan. But now I'd reached an age where certain childhood mysteries began to make sense. This girl's guileless remarks came as an illumination. So guileless is like innocent. She's not saying it trying to be mean. She just said, "Gee, I didn't know you could speak English." An instant knowledge that brought with it the first buds of true shame. From that day on, part of me yearned to be invisible. In a way, nothing would have been nicer than for no one to see me. Although I couldn't have defined it at the time, I felt that if attention were drawn to me, people would see what this girl had first responded to. They wouldn't see me, they would see the slant-eyed face, the Oriental. That is what accounts in part for the entire evacuation. You cannot deport 110,000 people unless you have stopped seeing individuals. Of course, for such a thing to happen, there has to be a kind of acquiescence on the part of the victims. So acquiescence, or when you acquiesce, you're basically just accepting something, you're kind of going with the flow. Some submerged belief that this treatment is deserved, or at least allowable. It's an attitude easy for non-whites to acquire in America. I had inherited it. Manzanar had confirmed it. And my feeling at 11 went something like this. You are going to be invisible anyway, so why not completely disappear? But another part of me did not want to disappear. With the same sort of reaction that sent Woody into the army, I instinctively decided I would have to prove that I wasn't different, that it should not be odd to hear me speaking English. From that day forward, I lived with this double impulse, the urge to disappear and the desperate desire to be acceptable. I soon learned there were certain areas I was automatically allowed to perform in: scholarship, athletics, and school-time activities like the yearbook, the newspaper, and student government. I tried all of these and made good grades, became news editor, held an office in the girls' athletic league. I also learned that outside school another set of rules prevailed. Choosing friends, for instance, often depended on whether or not I could be invited to their homes, whether their parents would allow this. And what is so infuriating looking back is how I accepted the situation. If refused by someone's parents, I would never say, "Go to hell," or "I'll find other friends," or "Who wants to come to your house anyway?" I would see it as my fault, the result of my failings. I was imposing a burden on them. I would absorb such rejections and keep on looking because for some reason the Scholarship Society and the Athletic League and the yearbook staff didn't satisfy me, were never quite enough. They were too limited or too easy or too obvious. I wanted to declare myself in some different way, and old enough to be marked by the internment, but still too young for the full impact of it to cow me. I wanted in. At one point, I thought I would like to join the Girl Scouts. A friend of mine belonged. That blonde girl who had commented on my reading. Her name was Ray Dean. Her folks had come west from Amarillo, Texas, and had made a little money in the aircraft plants, but not enough yet to get out of Cabrillo homes. We found ourselves walking partway home together every day. Her fascination with my ability to speak English had led to many other topics, but she had never mentioned the Girl Scouts to me. One day I did. "Can I belong?" I asked, then adding as an afterthought, as if to ease what I knew her answer would have to be, "You know, I'm Japanese." "Gee," she said, her friendly face suddenly a mask. "I don't know, but we can sure find out. Mama's the assistant troop leader." And then the next day, "Gee, Jeannie, no, I'm really sorry." Rage may have been simmering deep within me, but my conscious reaction was, "Oh well, that's okay, Ray Dean. I understand. I guess I'll see you tomorrow." "Sure, I'll meet you at the stoplight." I didn't hold this against her any more than I associated her personally with the first remark she made. It was her mother who had drawn the line, and I was used to that. If anything, Ray Dean and I were closer now. She felt obliged to protect me. She would catch someone staring at me as we walked home from school, and she would growl, "What are you looking at? She's an American citizen. She's got as much right as anybody to walk around on the street." Her outbursts always amazed me. I would much rather have ignored those looks than challenged them. At the same time, I wondered why my citizenship had to be so loudly affirmed, and I couldn't imagine why affirming it would really make any difference. If so, why hadn't it kept me out of Manzanar? But I was grateful when Ray Dean stuck up for me. Soon we were together all the time. I was teaching her how to twirl baton, and this started a partnership that lasted for the next 3 years. I hadn't forgotten what I'd learned in camp. My chubby teacher had taught me well. Ray Dean and I would practice in the grassy plots between the buildings, much as I used to in the fire breaks near Block 28, behind the back, between the legs, over the shoulder, high in the air, above the 2-story rooftops, watching it, timing its fall for the sudden catch. We practiced the splits and bending backward and high-stepping strut, and I saw myself a sequined princess leading orchestras across a football field, the idol of cheering fans. There happened to be a Boy Scout drum and bugle corps located in the housing project next to ours. They performed in local parades, and they were looking for some baton twirlers to march in front of the band. That fall, Ray Dean and I tried out, and we suited them just fine. They made me the lead majorette in the center between Ray Dean and Gloria, another girl from the 7th grade. Those two wore blue satin outfits to accent their bright blonde hair. My outfit was white with gold braid across the chest. We all wore white calf-high boots and boat-shaped hats. We worked out trio routines and practiced every weekend with the boys, marching up and down the streets of the project. We performed with them at our junior high assemblies as well as in the big band reviews each spring, with our batons glinting out in front of the bass drums and snares and shiny bugles, their banners, merit badges, khaki uniforms, and their squared-off military footwork. This was exactly what I wanted. It also gave me the first sure sign of how certain intangible barriers might be crossed. The Girl Scouts was much like a sorority, of the kind I would be excluded from in high school and later on in college, and it was run by mothers. The Boy Scouts was like a fraternity and run by fathers. Ray Dean and I were both maturing early. The boys in the band loved having us out there in front of them all the time, bending back and stepping high in our snug satin outfits and short skirts. Their dads, mostly Navy men, loved it too. At that age, I was too young to consciously use my sexuality or to understand how an Oriental female can fascinate Caucasian men, and of course far too young to see that even this is usually just another form of invisibility. It simply happened that the attention I first gained as a majorette went hand in hand with a warm reception from the Boy Scouts and their fathers, and from that point on, I knew intuitively that one resource I had to overcome the distorted limitations of my race would be my femininity. When Woody came back from Japan and when Ray came home on leave from the Coast Guard, they would tease me about the short skirts we wore and about my legs, which were near the other extreme from the heavy-thighed daikon ashi of the ballet dancer at Manzanar. They called me gobo ashi, after the long brown twig-like root vegetable gobo. They laughed, but they would show up for parades whenever they were in town, proud of their neighborhood celebrity. It was a pride that Papa didn't share. While I was striving to become Miss America of 1947, he was wishing I'd be Miss Hiroshima of 1904. He would counsel me on the female graces as he understood them, on the need to conceal certain parts of the body, on the gaudiness of smiling too much. But his taste could not compete with the pull from the world outside our family. For one thing, not much of our family remained. Though larger than the rooms at Manzanar, this apartment was still cramped, forcing us kids outside. We ate in shifts. Mama was gone most of the time, and worst of all, I had lost respect for Papa. I never dared show this, but it was true. His scheme for setting up a housing cooperative had failed. With blueprints in hand, he tramped through the Japanese community to hostels, trailer courts, other housing projects like ours, trying to find families who would invest in it. Few had money. Those who did were terrified to let any of it go. And the very idea of banking on some kind of matching support from the government seemed laughable after their internment experience. Papa needed an enterprise he could manage from within the family. He decided that a fortune could be made catching shrimp and abalone off the coast of Mexico, then bringing it back to dry and sell in Southern California. Woody was out of the Army by this time and looking for work. As a citizen, he could get a commercial license. So at intervals, he would rent a boat, take it down to Ensenada or below, load up with abalone, bring the catch home, and all the rest of us would spend days cleaning and cutting up the meat and stringing it out to dry in the bedrooms. For months, the apartment reeked of drying seafood. It was almost a brilliant scheme. In 1947, no one was yet drying abalone commercially, but there was a small worm that kept attacking the drying meat. Papa could never figure out how to control it. This plan, too, went to pieces. His failures were sharpened in an odd way by Woody's return. He came back from Japan with his mustache thicker and bearing a sword that had been in their family for 300 years, a gift from Aunt Toyo. He brought other trophies, painted scrolls, lacquered trays, things he would have valued only slightly before the war. All of this delighted Papa, filled him with pride for his son who had returned a larger man with a surer sense of himself, and of where we all had come from. Yet while Woody grew, Papa seemed to shrink, losing potency. Their roles had been reversed. Before the war, he had been the skipper. Now he depended more and more on Woody, who had youth and a citizen's mobility, who could license the boat or cross borders easily. Ever more vulnerable, Papa began drinking heavily again, and I would watch it with sorrow and disgust, unable then to imagine what he was going through, too far into my own junior high school survival. I couldn't understand why he was home all day when Mama had to go out working. I was ashamed of him for that, and in a deeper way for being what had led to our imprisonment, that is, for being so unalterably Japanese. I would not bring my friends home for fear of what he would say or do. When he refused to show up for the parades I marched in, this separated me from him that much more, while the events he did show up for left me miserable with embarrassment. One night, the local PTA held an awards dinner for all the students in the Scholarship Society. I was among them, and this was the sort of achievement Papa encouraged. He and Mama dressed up for the dinner. They overdressed. It was the first time they had mixed socially with Caucasians since leaving camp. Papa seldom spoke to Caucasians during those years or at any time afterward. When he did, it was a point of honor to appear supremely dignified. He still thought of himself as an aristocrat. He bought himself a brand new single-breasted suit of brown worsted for this occasion, with a matching brown vest and a brown and yellow flowered silk tie. Mama wore a maroon crepe dress with long sleeves, a necklace of shimmering gold discs, and a black Persian lamb coat I had not seen since before the war. She wore her hair in an upsweep. I knew she felt elegant and glad to be there. She smiled continually, smiled at everyone, as if to make up for Papa's solemn courtesies. When it came time for each student to be presented a certificate, the parents were introduced. Most of them stood up hastily or waved from their chairs like Radine's dad, a big ruddy Texan just as unfamiliar with this scene as Papa was. He blushed, grinned foolishly, and everybody grinned back, loving him. I was standing at the head of the table, shaking the principal's hand when Papa rose, his face ceremoniously grave, and acknowledged the other parents with his most respectful gesture. He pressed his palms together at his chest and gave them a slow, deep Japanese bow from the waist. They received this with a moment of careful, indecisive silence. He was unforgivably a foreigner then. Foreign to them, foreign to me, foreign to everyone but Mama, who sat next to him smiling with pleased modesty. 12 years old at the time, I wanted to scream. I wanted to slide out of sight under the table and dissolve. All right, that is the end of chapter 20. So now we're going on to 21. It is called The Girl of My Dreams. And this is the next to last chapter before the end of the novel. That bow was from the world I wanted out of, while the struttering sequin partnership I had with Radine was exactly how I wanted my life to go. My path through the next few years can be traced by its relationship to hers. It was a classic situation. In many ways, we had started even. Poor whites from West Texas, her family was so badly off sometimes she'd come to school with no lunch and no money, and we would split whatever I had brought along. At the same time, we were both getting all this attention together with the Drum and Bugle Corps. After 3 years at our junior high school in a ghetto neighborhood that included many Asians, blacks, Mexicans, and other white migrants from the South, we had ended up close to being social equals. We stayed best friends until we moved to Long Beach Polytechnic. There, everything changed. Our paths diverged. She was asked to join high school sororities. The question of whether or not I should be asked was never even raised. The boys I had crushes on would not ask me out. They would flirt with me in the hallways or meet me after school, but they would ask Radine to the dances, or someone like Radine, someone they could safely be seen with. Meanwhile, she graduated from baton twirler to song girl, a much more prestigious position in those days. It was unthinkable for Anise to be a song girl. Even choosing me as majorette created problems. The band teacher knew I had more experience than anyone else competing that year. He told me so, but he was afraid to use me. He had to go speak to the board about it and to some of the parents to see if it was allowable for an Oriental to represent the high school in such a visible way. It had never happened before. I was told that this inquiry was being made, and my reaction was the same as when I tried to join the Girl Scouts. I was apologetic for imposing such a burden on those who had to decide. When they finally assented, I was grateful. After all, I was the first Oriental majorette they'd ever had. Even if my once inevitable role now seemed vaguely second-rate, still I determined to try twice as hard to prove they'd made the right choice. This sort of treatment did not discourage me. I was used to it. I expected it, a condition of life. What demoralized me was watching Radine's success. We had shared everything, including all the values I'd learned from the world I wanted into, not only standards of achievement, but ideas about how a girl should look and dress and talk and act, and ideas of male beauty. Which was why so many of the boys I liked were Caucasian. Because I so feared never being asked, I often simply made myself unavailable for certain kinds of dates. If one of them had asked, of course, I would have been mortified. That would mean coming to Cabrillo Homes to pick me up, and the very thought of one of his daughters dating a Caucasian would have started Papa raving. He would have chased the fellow across the grass. This was my dilemma. Easy enough as it was to adopt white American values, I still had a Japanese father to frighten my boyfriends and a Japanese face to thwart my social goals. I never wanted to change my face or to be someone other than myself. What I wanted was the kind of acceptance that seemed to come so easily to Radine. To this day, I have a recurring dream which fills me each time with a terrible sense of loss and desolation. I see a young, beautifully blonde and blue-eyed high school girl moving through a room full of others her own age, much admired by everyone, men and women both, myself included, as I watch through a window. I feel no malice toward the girl. I don't even envy her. Watching, I am simply emptied, and in the dream I want to cry out because she is something I can never be, some possibility in my life that can never be fulfilled. It is a schoolgirl's dream, one I tell my waking self I've long since outgrown, yet it persists. Once or twice a year she will be there, the boyfriend-surrounded queen who passed me by. Surely her example spurred me on to pursue what now seemed ludicrous, but at the time was the height of my post-Manzanar ambitions. It didn't happen in Long Beach. There I felt defeated. I watched Radine's rise, and I knew I could never compete with that. Gradually, I lost interest in school and began hanging around on the streets. I would probably have dropped out for good, but it was just about this time that Papa decided to go back into farming and finally moved us out of Cabrillo Homes. A few months earlier, he had almost killed himself on a combination of whiskey and some red wine made by an Italian drinking buddy of his. He had been tipping steadily for 2 days when he started vomiting blood from his mouth and nose. It sobered him up permanently. He never touched alcohol again. After that, he pulled himself together, and when the chance came along to lease a sharecrop 100 acres from a big strawberry grower up north in Santa Clara Valley, he took it. That's where he stayed until he died, raising premium berries outside of San Jose. I was a senior when we moved. In those days, 1951, San Jose was a large town, but not yet a city. Coming from a big high school in Southern California gave me some kind of shine, I suppose. It was a chance to start over, and I made the most of it. By the spring of that year, when it came time to elect the annual carnival queen from the graduating seniors, my homeroom chose me. I was among 15 girls nominated to walk out for inspection by the assembled student body on voting day. I knew I couldn't beat the other contestants at their own game, that is, looking like a bobby soxer. Yet neither could I look too Japanesey. I decided to go exotic with a flower print sarong, black hair loose, and a hibiscus flower behind my ear. When I walked barefoot out onto the varnished gymnasium floor between the filled bleachers, the howls and whistles from the boys were doubled what had greeted any of the other girls. It sounded like some winning basket had just been made in the game against our oldest rivals. It was pretty clear what the outcome would be, but ballots still had to be cast and counted. The next afternoon, I was standing outside my Spanish class when Leonard Rodriguez, who sat next to me, came hurrying down the hall with a revolutionary's fire in his eye. He helped out each day in the administration office. He had just overheard some teachers and a couple of secretaries counting up the votes. "They're trying to stuff the ballot box," he whispered loudly. "They're fudging on the tally. They're afraid to have a Japanese girl be queen. They've never had one before. They're afraid of what some of the parents will say." He was pleased he had caught them, and more pleased to be telling this to me, as if some long-held suspicion of conspiracy had finally been confirmed. I shared it with him. Whether this was true or not, I was prepared to believe that teachers would stuff the ballot box to keep me from being queen. For that reason, I couldn't afford to get my hopes up. I said, "So what?" He leaned toward me eagerly with final proof. "They want Lois Carson to be queen. I heard them say so." If applause were any measure, Lois Carson wasn't even in the running. She was too slim and elegant for beauty contests, but her father had contributed a lot to the school. He was on the board of trustees. She was blonde, blue-eyed. At that point, her name might as well have been Radine. I was ready to capitulate without a groan. So that's kind of like she's ready to just give up. She's ready to say, "Okay, fine, you win." "If she doesn't make Carnival Queen this year," Leonard went on smugly, "she'll never be queen of anything anywhere else for the rest of her life." "Let her have it then if she wants it so much." "No, we can't do that. You can't do that." I could do that very easily. I wasn't going to be caught caring about this or needing it the way I had needed the majorette position. I already sensed, though I couldn't have said why, that I would lose either way, no matter how it turned out. My face was indifferent. "How can I stop them from fudging," I said, "if that's what they want to do?" He hesitated. He looked around. He set his brown face, my champion. "You can't," he said, "but I can." He turned and hurried away toward the office. The next morning he told me he had gone in there and raised holy hell, threatened to break this news to the student body and make the whole thing more trouble than it would ever be worth. An hour later, the announcement came over the intercom that I had been chosen. I didn't believe it. I couldn't let myself believe it. But for the classmates who had nominated me, I had to look overjoyed. I glanced across at Leonard, and he winked, shouting and whooping now with all the others. At home that evening when I brought this news, no one whooped. Papa was furious. I had not told them I was running for queen. There was no use mentioning it until I had something to mention. He asked me what I had worn at the tryouts. I told him. "No wonder those Caucasian boys vote for you," he shouted. "It is just like those majorette clothes you wear in the street, showing off your body. Is that the kind of queen you want to be?" I didn't say anything. When Papa lectured, you listened. If anyone spoke up, it would be Mama trying to mediate. "Co," she said now, "these things are important to Jeannie. She is important. I'll tell you what is important. Modesty is important. A graceful body is important. You don't show your legs all the time. You don't walk around like this." He did an imitation of a girl's walk with shoulders straight, an assertive stride, and lips pulled back in a baboon's grin. I started to laugh. "Don't laugh. This is not funny. You become this kind of woman, and what Japanese boy is going to marry you? Tell me that. You put on tight clothes and walk around like Jean Harlow, and the Caucasian boys make you the queen. And pretty soon you end up marrying a Caucasian boy." He broke off. He could think of no worse end result. He began to stomp back and forth across the floor while Mama looked at me cautiously, with a glance that said, "Be patient. Wait him out. After he has spoken his piece, you and I can talk sensibly." He saw this and turned on her. "Hey, how come your daughter is 17 years old, and if you put a sack over her face, you couldn't tell she was Japanese from anyone else on the street?" "Co," Mama said quietly, "Jeannie's in high school now. Next year she's going to college. She's learning other things. Listen to me. It's not too late for her to learn Japanese ways of movement. The Buddhist church in San Jose gives Odori classes twice a week. Jeannie, I want you to phone the teacher and tell her you are going to start taking lessons. Mama has kimonos you can wear. She can show you things too. She used to know all the dances. We have pictures somewhere. Mama, what happened to all those pictures?" I had seen them, photos of Mama when she lived in Spokane, 12 years old, and her round face blanched with rice powder. I remember the afternoon I spent with the incomprehensible old geisha at Manzanar. "Papa," I complained, "don't make faces. You don't want to be the carnival queen. You want to be the carnival queen? I tell you what, I'll make a deal with you. You can be the queen if you start Odori lessons at the Buddhist church as soon as school is out." He stood there, hands on hips, glaring at me, and not at all satisfied with his ultimatum. It was far too late for Odori classes to have any effects on me, and Papa knew this, but he owed it to himself to make one more show of resistance. When I signed up a few weeks later, I lasted about 10 lessons. The teacher herself sent me away. I smiled too much and couldn't break the habit. Like a majorette before the ever-shifting sidewalk crowd, I smiled during performances, and in Japanese dancing that is equivalent to a concert violinist walking on stage in a bathing suit. Papa didn't mention my queenship again. He just glared at me from time to time with great distaste, as if I had betrayed him. Yet in that glare I sometimes detected a flicker of approval, as if this streak of independence, this refusal to be shaped by him, reflected his own obstinance. At least these glances seemed to say, "She has inherited that." Mama, of course, was very proud. She took charge and helped me pick out the dress I would wear for the coronation. We drove to San Jose and spent an afternoon in the shops downtown. She could take time for such things now that Papa was working again. This was one of the few days she and I ever spent together, just the two of us, and it confirmed something I'd felt since early childhood. In her quiet way, she had always supported me, alongside of or underneath Papa's demands and expectations. Now she wanted for me the same thing I thought I wanted: acceptance. In her eyes was simply another means for survival. Her support and Papa's resistance had one point in common: too much exposure was unbecoming. All the other girls, my 4 attendants, were going strapless. Mama wouldn't allow this. By the time we finished shopping, I had begun to agree with her. When she picked out a frilly ball gown that covered almost everything and buried my legs under layers of ruffles, I thought it was absolutely right. I had used a low-cut sarong to win the contest, but once chosen, I would be a white-gowned figure out of Gone with the Wind. I would be respectable. On coronation night, the gym was lit like a church with bleachers in half dark and a throne at one end, flooded brightly from the ceiling. The throne was made of plywood, its back shaped in a fleur-de-lis, all covered with purple taffeta that shone like oily water under moonlight. Bed sheets were spread to simulate a wide white carpet the length of the gym from the throne of the door to the girls' locker room, where, with my attendants, we waited for the PA system to give us our musical cue. Lois Carson, the trustee's daughter, was one of them. She wore a very expensive strapless gown and a huge orchid corsage. Her pool brown shoulders glowed in the harsh bulb light above the lockers. "Oh, Jeannie," she had said as we took off our coats, "what a marvelous idea." I looked at her inquisitively. "The high neck," she explained, studying my dress. "You look so sedate, just perfect for a queen." As the other girls arrived, she made sure they all agreed with this. "Don't you wish you'd thought of it?" she would say. And then to me, during a silence, she felt obliged to fill, "I just love Chinese food." The others exclaimed that they too loved Chinese food, and we talked about recipes and restaurants until the music faded in. "Girl of my dreams, I love you. Honest I do, you are so sweet." It swelled during the opening bars to cover all other sounds in the gym. I stepped out into blue light that covered the first sheet, walking very slowly like you do at weddings, carrying against the white bodice of my gown a bouquet of pink carnations. A burst of applause resounded beneath the music, politely enthusiastic, followed by a steady murmur. The gym was packed and the lights were intense. Suddenly it was too hot out there. I imagined that they were all murmuring about my dress. They saw the girls behind me staring at it. The throne seemed blocks away, and now the dress was stifling me. I had never before worn such an outfit. It was not at all what I should have on. I wanted my sarong, but then thought, no, that would have been worse. Papa had been right about the sarong. Maybe he was right about everything. What was I doing out there anyway, trying to be a carnival queen? The teachers who'd counted the votes certainly didn't think it was such a good idea. Neither did the trustees. The students wanted me, though. Their votes proved that. I kept walking my processional walk, thinking of all the kids who had voted for me, not wanting to let them down, although in a way I already had. I wasn't the girl in this old-fashioned dress they had voted for. But if not her, who had they voted for? Somebody I wanted to be. And wasn't. Who was I then? According to the big wall speakers now saxophoning through the gym, I was the girl of somebody's dreams. A dream. "Since you've been gone, dear, life don't seem the same. Please come back again." I looked ahead at the throne. It was even further away, a purple carriage receding as I approached. I glanced back. My 4 attendants seemed tiny. Had they stopped back there? Afterward, there would be a little reception in one of the classrooms, punch and cookies under fluorescent tubes. Later, at Lois Carson's house, there'd be a more intimate, less public gathering, which I'd overheard a mention of but wouldn't be invited to. Champagne in the foothills, oyster dip. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. I wanted to be 10 years old again so I could believe in princesses and queens. It was too late. Too late to be an Odori dancer for Papa, too late to be this kind of heroine. I wanted the carnival to end so I could go somewhere private, climb out of my stuffy dress, and cool off, but all eyes were on me. It was too late now not to follow this make-believe carpet to its plywood finale, and I did not yet know of any truer destination. All right, that is the end of chapter 21. Tomorrow we will go into part 3, which is just one chapter, chapter 22, called 10,000 Voices. And then we will be all done with this book. So I will see you guys tomorrow, and just let me know what questions you have.